Welcome to episode 6 of the Search for Sustainability documentary series. This is your host, Nathan Crane, and I'm very delighted to share this episode with you this evening. You know, episode 6 is all about sustainable medicine and what does it look like to sustainably gather, grow, harvest, and use nature's medicines for our bodies in a vibrant and healthy way. The beautiful thing is the more you learn about the tens of thousands of medicinal plant species on the planet, and you don't need to know all of them, even a handful, you become more confident and self-sufficient to be able to handle most, any, if not all, of any health challenges that you face for you and your family. I mean, there are herbs and there are remedies and there are solutions and there are medicines provided by nature to basically not only help the body to heal itself if there is some kind of health issue, but to prevent the health issues in the first place. You know, nature's medicine is so powerful and it's so beautiful and it's sustainable when you know how to harvest it sustainably, grow it sustainably, gather it sustainably, and use it sustainably. So tonight's episode, I hope it empowers you as it has empowered me and my family. And I look forward to sharing it with you. So let's go ahead and dive into episode number 6.
One of the other things that I feel is, really important in the journey towards sustainability is becoming empowered in our own health and well-being. And so for me, that means learning about the plants where I live, what medicinal properties they have, learning to make my own medicines, learning to wild forage, because there's such an abundance of food in the mountains out there, and so many people don't even realize what's there, or how to prepare it. And that's something that, more recently I've become really excited about.
We need to remember some things about collecting plants and about being human. Human beings are gatherers of plants. We don't live without plants. Plants give us the gift of life. This clothing that I have on is made of plants. The food that I ate before we began this discussion came from the plant people. The buildings we live in are gifts from the plant people. We're told the air is given to us by the plants. One of the native teachings that I think is really powerful is that the plants consider us their children, and so they allow us what a parent should allow children, the ability to grow. So they support us in our learning. Plants do not carry malevolency. That's something that's very, very important to understand. When we're working with the plant people, if we see one of their actions as a malevolent action, that tells us immediately that we have gained the wrong perspective, and we need to look at the situation until we find out how the plants were not having any malevolent intention.
We learned a philosophy that I believe is the most sophisticated health philosophy ever created in human history, which was developed over many thousands of years by very brilliant people using empirical observation. And they lived in the woods, they lived in a natural place, they lived according to nature. They came to find over time that there are two basic polarities of energy called yin and yang that form the so-called, what we call duality in the West, and that these two forces, if held in homeostasis, an organism thrives. If it is brought out of that balance, the organism experiences ill health. And so our orientation is to keep that balance in homeostasis. And you can see this, once you learn the basic philosophy that we work with, you can see it in nature, you can see it in everything. You can see this tree, this animal, this plant, this species is genetically in its integrity and balance, or you can see the degree to which it's out. It takes many years to come to see that, but fortunately we have 5,000 years of empirical observation from China, people who lived according to nature, who lived in the woods, who collected plants and tasted them and wrote down their basic energies for our sake today. A very sophisticated materia medica of herbology, all based on natural sourcing, the wild-crafted herbs. And we still have this wisdom today about how the ecology is kept in its pristineness for the sake of providing the best therapeutic plants for our needs.
So herbal medicine has always been a really deep part of my life, I think, at least from the standpoint of even as a kid, as I mentioned, being close to plants. I've also been fascinated by the world of martial arts since I was 13. I studied martial arts of one type or another, and I got actually to a point in martial arts study where my teacher at the time said, "You can't go any further. I'm not going to teach you any further, at least not with me, until you start to study some sort of a healing art." And I started thinking and looking around, and I realized, wow, it's absolutely right. I mean, I don't understand the body, and I don't really understand the body. And the more I started to understand the body, the more it led me to the plant world. And so I always tell people your big transition into understanding and being an herbalist, whether you call yourself a practicing herbalist or not, but just being an herbalist to me is that point where you have healed yourself or a plant has healed you of something that's a major phenomenon in your life. Okay, for me it was in the middle of the Q course having a broken thumb and using 2 herbs to get myself through that. So I got through what's called med lab in Special Forces Q course, the medic portion, which is the hardest portion of it, with a broken thumb. And I did that because of 2 herbs, comfrey and horsetail. And I hid it, I had it inside of a wrap, an ace wrap as a poultice, but it was something that normally would only be a pinned, would need an open reduction, internal fixation, or a pin, and that would have recycled me. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I managed to talk the doctor into putting a cast on it. He called me an idiot and told me I'd never have full grip strength in my hand again. And I walked out of there, got out to the barracks, cut off my cast, and went to town. And I knew there were some herbs there, and I used those. And I used them over a period of time, and again, kind of in a hidden fashion for my instructors during the Q course. But my point to that is that was a transition from just understanding medicine a little bit, and plants are medicine, to really understanding, oh, I get it. These plants are part of us. I mean, this is a connectedness in our spirits. And so that is the point that herbalism became part of me, I guess I could say.
In 1998, when I was just 13 years old, my family decided to hike from Mexico to Canada on the Pacific Crest Trail. We had no business hiking. In fact, prior to that, we had never hiked for more than 2 days. And then when we went on that 2-day hike, that overnight hike, we failed miserably, meaning we didn't have the right gear. We had a canvas tent that basically all the wind broke all the poles. So then we erected a tarp, started a fire under the tarp because it was raining, burned a hole in the tarp. I mean, it failed terribly. And so when my mother announced that we were actually going to hike for 6 months, my father, who's a tough Russian man, started to cry. And in Russia, there's a saying that the man is the head of the household and the woman is the neck, and wherever the neck looks, the head is forced to turn, you know. So basically my mom was the driving force between all of our radical adventures. So in one April morning, we embarked on this trip, had our backpacks full of games and various foods and various, you know, things that we thought we needed in the woods. When you embark on a trip of that size, you can't pack everything you need in one backpack because obviously it's 2,500 miles. It's going to take a while. So before the trip, we made parcels of food that we mailed to ourselves. And then every 100 miles we'd go by and we'd pick up a food parcel from a post office. And in theory, everything worked, but in practice it didn't because we were not very experienced, as I just mentioned. And what would happen is we'd pick up our food parcel. It would last us 5 days instead of the intended 7 or 8. And so we'd basically hike and fast for the remaining days before we got our next food parcel. Anybody who's ever tried fasting knows that that's not very fun, and it's even less fun when you're hiking up big peaks every day. So pretty quickly it became evident that we would either have to do something different or quit the trail. And we were doing it on a shoestring budget, so buying more food wasn't really an option. You know, it's like, could you buy 6 months worth of food right now? It'd be tough for anyone. We were kind of homeless and living out of our car at the time, so we didn't have the budget to buy more food. And then, as luck would have it, we met this guy that was sort of foraging along the trail, and we asked him what he was doing, and he explained to us that the wilderness, nature is full of food, and you just have to know where to look and what to look for, and you could be provided for. We then picked up a little foraging guide and just started doing it. And what we found in the months that followed was that not only does nature provide, but that it's healthy, it could be very delicious, and very fun. You know, people often focus on aspects of survival as this hard, tough life that you have to live and no part of it can be enjoyable. But what I found and was fortunate enough to live for 6 months of that trip was that it was fun, it was delicious, it was healthful, and it was easy. So from then on, about a couple weeks into our trip, we started eating up to 80% wild edibles. We would have salads with wild onions and dandelions and salsify and all sorts of crazy things. And when we were done that following September on the Canadian border, it was the best I've ever felt. And I sort of ran with this whole foraging thing. I started researching it more and have been doing it for over a decade now. And it's amazing. And I think it's something that can help everybody, regardless of whether you're into being in nature, you know, if you're outdoorsy or not. It's just healthful. In my opinion, wild edibles and edible weeds are true superfoods. And you don't need to buy any sort of fancy powders or supplements. You just need to go outside and pick things that are considered weeds, and they will do your body good.
And during that time that I spent living primitively, basically, that was what I wanted to do and was able to do, I learned how to eat only wild foods for very long periods of time, and I was a vegetarian also. So that's a twist that many people have never experienced. It's a rare thing to live only on wild foods for long periods, and it's even rarer to live on the plants. And any of us who've spent much time trying to understand the wild foods, or even fasting or changing our diets, any of those things, we realize fairly quickly that we don't want to live a life of being half starved. We want solid energy, and that's what I learned, the familiarity with these plants to the place where I could be nourished by them in that way. And with that came these understandings of the medicinal uses of these plants, and the closeness and the connection with all of these relatives.
What I love to do is teach people that the ordinary plants in their backyards are not only edible, but we considered them to be necessary when we were first here in this country. They were our food. They were the things that we even brought with us, such as the dandelion. Brought over on the Mayflower, it was brought over by the Hudson's Bay Company, the James Bay Company, from Europe. It's not a native plant here. And the reason they brought it is because every part of it's edible, every part of it's medicinal, and it grows really easily, as everyone knows. So something that I want to put back into people's consciousness is the fact that that dandelion was the thing that you ate at the beginning of a meal to start your whole digestion going, because it's bitter. And bitters start the gallbladder, which gets the bile going, which digests the heaviest fats, the heaviest foods. And you need it in your stomach before the food gets there, which is why we ate salads. Salads were composed of things like dandelions and chicory and endive and all of these things that had some bitterness to them because of what it did for our digestive system. Also, the dandelion is a superb thing in the spring. We used to have dandelion tonic, dandelion tea, something like that. It was a spring tonic. Why? Well, it cleans out very gently, it cleans out your kidneys, it cleans out your liver, it cleans out your large intestine. When we were depending on the food that we put down and put in our root cellars for the winter, by the time the dandelion came up in the spring, before it could even flower, we wanted it, we ate it, because it swiftly but very gently cleans out the winter funk. And that winter funk was from eating preserved foods, salted foods, shrivelly apples, shrivelly potatoes, because that's what was left by March, you know? And so we could hardly wait to get those little greens and eat them. This was the first microgreens, you know, now they're a big thing. Well, microgreens in the spring were the little bitty teeny tiny lamb's quarters, which was called wild spinach. And those little plants, just like the little sprouts that we do, contain the entire value of the plant in a little miniature form. And you just eat it. You don't have to eat many. And it gives you some plant protein, some plant calcium, trace minerals. All of these plants that I'm talking about so far have deep tap roots. Those tap roots go down and get the trace minerals that we no longer have in our food. One of the reasons that I've gone back to teaching what I learned from my grandparents and my parents growing up on a farm is because our food supplies, for the most part, are tragically deficient in those things we're supposed to get from them. So back in the early 50s, a bowl of spinach, like Popeye said, did contain a day's worth of iron. Now you need 30 bowls of spinach to get the same amount of iron. That's ridiculous. Even someone who loves spinach is not going to eat that. You know, it's just too much. So these little plants are bringing that back into our bodies. And once you start eating them, you'll find that you will go out and crave them. You'll go out, oh, I want this today. And you can tell backwards what it is your body needs, what's out of whack, what's out of balance, by what you're drawn to. Once you start eating these little weeds. They're not weeds. They're just our first plants. They happened to be what we fed ourselves with before we could garden. And they're just as valuable now. They're beautiful things.
So the first thing I want to say is that a weed, according to Thoreau, is any beautiful flower or plant that grows where it's not desired. So the definition of weed is very fluid, and in my opinion, it doesn't really say much. It just means like a plant is growing somewhere that it's not intended to be growing. Traditionally, what most people consider weeds are those pesky things that grow in your garden. Perhaps the best example of a weed is a dandelion. Most people who have a lawn usually notice those yellow flowers that come up in the springtime, and they become quite a nuisance because you want a perfect green lawn, but now you have dandelions. And what I tell people is that as soon as you realize how beneficial a dandelion is, it'll never be a nuisance ever again. Because dandelions are everywhere, they're very abundant, they're very resilient. You can eat them and you'll never eradicate them. They're great for your inner organs, like your spleen, your pancreas, your liver, your kidneys. They taste delicious in pesto. They taste great in green smoothies. And they're a free food that everybody can enjoy. And not only that, but wild edibles are more nutritious than store-bought foods. And there's many reasons why this is. One of the biggest reasons is because their roots are generally longer than cultivated plants. So they're genetically stronger. These longer roots are able to go down below depleted topsoil and thus draw out more nutrients, more minerals. Weeds and wild edibles often grow in places where soil hasn't been disrupted. So, even with organic farming practices, when a farm is forced to grow 10,000 heads of lettuce, it becomes difficult to ensure that the soil stays healthy because you're just pillaging the soil over and over again. Whereas wild edibles, they grow according to how nature intended. And so when you pick a dandelion, for example, you're picking it from an area that is more nutrient rich to begin with.
This knowledge and this skill from herbal medicine is something that is very much learnable by anybody. It's the common man's medicine. It's been our medicine long before we had this last 100-year culture change in Orthodox medicine. And so it's for you out there, and you can learn it and you can practice it at home, and you can get better on it at home, and you can use it on yourself and you can use it on your loved ones. It's gentle enough, usually, unless you do something stupid, it's gentle enough to be able to use and not worry about making any big mistakes, especially for acute conditions like fevers and colds and flus and that type of thing. Healing of wounds and that type of thing. So to me, I think that herbal medicine should be really at least a basic skill set that everybody is aware of, and beyond that, I think everybody in your family, in your group of people, whatever your community is, everybody needs basic first aid and really wilderness first aid training. And honestly, herbal medicine and wilderness first aid training tend to just kind of go hand in hand.
Herbs and foods are very important to have both of them in the diet for us. Again, the herbs are oftentimes from perennial plants, and the foods we eat are from what we call annual cultivars. So they're still soft and chewy and succulent, and we eat them. We can masticate and salivate them, digest it with our peptic enzymes. But when it comes to herbs, we need the deeper adaptogens that this plant has developed in order to live various, its perennial life through years of, the changes. So it develops more complex polysaccharides and beta-glucans and triterpenes and whatever it needs to protect itself, polyphenols, so these things that have longer names, they become more complicated. But yet then the nutrition of that herbal component is locked in to a woody cellulose called lignin, because the plant's got to hold itself up now, so it's got to kind of turn into like a little tree of some sort. So then what we do is we unlock, we take that and we unlock it through process of boiling the tea, simmering it, steeping it, decocting it in alcohol, and then maybe powdering it or taking it all as a tea. And that in conjunction with our living food diet, our annual cultivars, our succulents, is an excellent regimen for us for maintaining health. We can produce that in our own little microsphere, in our own little permaculture microsphere, where we have our perennial herbs growing under the larger bushy trees, under the nut trees, and then the fruit trees in there mixed in, and then the annual cultivars, the shade-loving stuff under there. And the science of this has all been put together.
Garlic is, I believe, one of the crops that you should absolutely learn to grow. It grows well in the southern parts and in the northern parts. There are different varieties, but garlic is one of the best home medicines that you can grow. I believe there's 25 to 35 active constituents in garlic that work together synergistically. In comparison, take penicillin. There's only one active constituent. It's penicillin. And the bacteria pretty quickly figure out how to get around that. Tetracycline, there's only one active ingredient. It's tetracycline. Garlic, like I said, there's 25 to 30. It's very hard for them to be able to get a good antibacterial, antiviral, even antifungal. And it's the first go-to medicine for almost any time you're having some type of infection or problem. So it's a fantastic thing to know how to grow. And plus, there are 3 survival foods you should know how to grow, and that's garlic, onions, and tomatoes. Because with garlic, onions, and tomatoes, you can make anything else taste good.
Here we have a wild edible gold mine. We are here at Paul Wheaton's secret lab, and he has this awesome mound that's full of just all kinds of different things. And if you don't know what you're looking at, you might not be as excited as I am, but this is like a grocery store in my book. So we're gonna just look at a few different things, and I'll show you kind of how I go about this. Right here, first plant, this is wild mustard. Mustards are part of the Brassica family, which is one of the largest family of plants. And they are super duper incredibly nutritious. When you're looking for wild edibles, it's a great idea to engage all of your senses. So a lot of people think, how does it taste? And that's kind of the only sense that they focus on. But a good forager engages scent, touch, hearing. Actually, tasting is the last scent that you should engage. So the first scent would be, what does it look like? You know, like this branch, if I look at it, it looks hard and unappetizing, and that alone communicates to me that it's not a good edible. The next scent is, what does it feel like? Again, I feel this branch, it feels very tough, like I could chip a tooth on it. So right away, those 2 senses have eliminated a lot of things. Then the next scent would be, what does it smell like? Some plants smell awful, and that's a good indication that you shouldn't eat them. And other plants smell delicious, and that's a great indication, can be, that you should eat them. Our sense of hearing is perhaps the most kind of obscure sense. You cannot hear a plant speak to you, although some Native Americans believe that you could. So I take this to interpret, listen to your surroundings. Is there a road nearby? Can you hear people spraying the plant? So basically listen to the environment and see if anything is jeopardizing the edibility of the plant. And then lastly, you would engage your sense of taste. So with wild mustards, this yellow plant right here, the easiest way to identify a mustard is to crush it up and smell it. And if it smells like mustard, it's part of the Brassica family, it's totally edible. And it's delicious in salads, sandwiches, wraps, soups. So yeah, remember that. If it smells like mustard, it's mustard.
You really can settle down with a plant and touch it, smell it, and it'll tell you, no, this is not good for you. Yes, this is very good for you. And there's the aroma alone will tell you. There is a very deadly plant that grows in Denver and Boulder called hemlock. There's both water hemlock and the other hemlock. This is not the tree. This is not the evergreen tree. This is a plant that grows that's in the same family as wild parsley, wild carrot, parsnip, and Queen Anne's lace. These are all, they have umbrels. They have these flat flower umbrels that look like umbrellas. And the ones that are edible, when you pick a leaf and pinch it in your fingers, when you smell it, it smells like parsley, it smells like carrot, it smells like, what was the other one? Parsnip. You know, it smells like a vegetable. If you get hemlock and you do the same thing and take off a little piece of leaf and smell it, you'll turn your head. It's like, that's a good sign. Leave it alone. Don't go near it. And you don't have any time if you eat that accidentally. Use your nose. I use my lips, my tongue, the tip of my tongue. I bite a little teeny, just bruise the leaf. If it makes my tongue numb, if it makes my lips feel funny, that's the end of that. I don't put it any further in my mouth. We have the ability to know what's good for us and what's not if we settle down and get out there and start playing with the plants, play with them. So it's an exciting world, and we've just kind of lost touch. We've kind of taken a step back.
I do think plant knowledge is amazing. And I see that botanical education from all the things that I see and read, is decreasing, that people aren't doing that kind of research as much. There's a lot more more high-tech stuff that's going on, and a lot less biological research that's going on, which I think is sad. I think when I heard a couple of talks this weekend where people were thinking of health in terms of abundance and not necessarily biodiversity, which is different. So they're looking at large amounts of grass, for instance, but not looking at what species that is, or if there's a good mix, or if there's other things in terms of other kinds of plants mixed in, like flowering plants maybe that are not grasses. So I think I'd like people to think more about healthy ecosystems that are diverse and support each other, and kind of in that permaculture sense of how it all interacts together. And if you're going to have an influence in the environment, which we do, right? We always do. Maybe just to try to think about how that affects all the organisms. Because when I look at some of those things like, oh, we want to have a lot of grass, we make a lot of grass. Well, what else is happening there? Like, what are the consequences of that for us and for the world?
In the foraging world, there's two approaches. One is kind of the Native American approach, which says that all foods are edible. If you know which part of the plant to eat, the dosage, which time of year. And so Native Americans believe everything is edible and everything has a use. And then there's the other more scientific approach where everything is poisonous. If you approach plants from a toxicologist standpoint, you'll find that even plants like mint or basil get classified as toxic because toxicologists are looking at alkaloids and various toxins within each plant. I think I am somewhere between those two spectrums, but closer to the Native American standpoint, because all greens have toxins in them to some degree. Like even store-bought greens like kale or lettuce, if you analyze them, they have various alkaloids in them, which are nature's way of preventing us from eating too many. You know, if we lived off the land, close to nature, we couldn't eat kale year-round because of seasons. We would eat kale while it was in season, then it would be out of season, then we'd eat a different green. Similarly, in the wild edible world, as I'm going around and I'm foraging, I know that miner's lettuce, for example, is in season March and April. So I'm eating lots of miner's lettuce in March and April, and then come end of April, it's not in season anymore, I move on to other greens. So I very much identify more with the Native American perspective where there are more edible things. And in sharing my story, I basically teach people how to approach weeds with caution so that they ensure their safety, and at the same time aren't scared away from foraging altogether, because sometimes the result of the other approach, the toxicologist approach, is the forest is dangerous, never go out there, just observe. And that's just not, I don't think that's right, because we are part of nature and we have to be part of it. We have to participate.
So we need to know that a plant that we're gathering is an abundant plant. We need to know where its distribution are. Many plants are worldwide. Many are only in a region. We collect abundant plants where they are represented abundantly. And that means we don't really collect from the very edges of their habitats. We want to be very thoughtful. We want to use our mind and continuously gain knowledge of these relatives so that our gathering techniques and areas are done in a way that supports them. Their design, their gift to us, among many things, we know a little bit. Many things we have no idea that they do. We have so little idea of the magic of all of these relatives. We know that the bees pollinate our plants, but if they were gone and they didn't pollinate those plants, we can understand that. We see that that would be not a good thing. But we have no idea what the movement of their wings does. Perhaps it makes the sky blue. We really don't know so much of what each of these individual relatives do. So we thank them for what they know, what we know, and what we don't know. We must work at understanding these plants with our mind. So it's always an engagement in the unseen and an engagement in the seen. We use this beautiful, beautiful gift of a mind. But if we use only our mind, it can lead us to being dominant and having some of the problems that we humans have experienced, of causing animals and plants to be extinct or rare. But if we use the combination, we have a much, much greater chance of creating a world, really, or our own experience at least, that has that balanced harmony that we're looking for.
When I go out into the forest and before I harvest, I always if we're mushroom foraging, they say to always leave the first one that you find, as an offering, and ask it to kind of show you where the others are. And with mushrooms, it seems always like once you find one, then you see them everywhere. That's always been my experience. But, like today, harvesting elderflower, just kind of gently just touching the plant and saying thank you. Sometimes I'll sing, in the past I've given tobacco or a little bit of honey, just some kind of offering and thanksgiving. And then, the other side of that is to use everything that you take. I think in our, in this day and age, convenience has made us a little bit lazy, and in that we've become a little bit wasteful. We use something once and we throw it away. So many things have become disposable. And yet when you have to really work for it and you see the process and all the labor and the love that went into getting something, you're much more inclined to use every last bit that you can.
The most important thing is that you go out with a good heart and you have a good heart. So just go out with your good heart and be grateful for what they're giving you. And the words don't matter so much and the actions don't matter so much. There's many things you can do, and I've done different things when I'm with, different people have different traditions. So to me, it doesn't matter what you do to show gratitude as long as you're showing it and feeling it and not over harvesting and not taking advantage, and noticing that being's individuality in a way. Each plant is an individual, and I try to remember that, and I literally talk to plants, and people have made fun of me because I don't know I'm doing it a lot. And so I had one person I was working with, and he goes, "Oh yeah, you're the one, I know your name, you're the woman who talks to plants." And I said, "Do I really talk out loud?" And he said, "Yes, all the time." And I do notice that especially if I spend a lot of time by myself out in nature, I talk to many plants, and I usually call them cutie because I think they're all beautiful. And then someone asks me what my favorite plants are, or I'll see a plant and I'll say, "Oh, that's one of my favorites." And I pretty much say that to everyone that I know. And the ones that I don't know, it can't be my favorite yet, but maybe it will be later when I get to know it.
My main tool when I go out gathering weeds and so forth is a pair of scissors with a long blade. A pair of heavy-duty scissors with a long blade. Why? You can get down and get the whole root. Get it all out. Then you can use the root as a handle to wash the rest of the dandelion and get all the dirt off the leaves. It's harder to wash them one leaf at a time than it is just to dip them and wash them. Then you wash the root if it's big enough, and you can roast that in the oven till it gets a nice dark brown. You want it low oven, 200 degrees maybe. And that, when it's ground up, makes a nice tea all by itself. It has inulin in it, which is one of the good forms of sweetening and sugar. And that light roasting doesn't really hurt it. You can keep it, you can even just have it dry a little bit on your countertop or something if you scrub it well with a brush. The kids like to use the stem from the flower as a straw. It's hollow. The flowers, when they're wide open and flat, are tasty and they're very sweet. They taste like honey. You don't eat the green calyx, but you just nibble on those, but not when it's closed, either before or after blooming, but when it's open, totally flat. That's when you introduce it to kids. Have them nibble on that. Cut just the little yellow off and put it in a salad. Put it in a pancake batter. Add a little something to your diet. Then there are the mallows. They look like wild geraniums. Now, they're not. They're mallows. But Malva neglecta, which is what we have here, back east it's marshmallow. In the desert there's a desert mallow. Mallows are all over the place. Their flowers are edible, their leaves are edible. The stems of the leaves are a wonderful little snack when you toast them up with a little olive oil, a little garlic. They're a yummy little snack. The roots are very good if they're big enough. Scrub them up, dice them up, put them in a stew. You won't know what it is, but it'll be, whoa, this is good. What is this?
Some plants that are annuals and very abundant, we can gather large quantities of them from a given place, but we never take them all. Never, never, never. 10, 20%. Plants that are roots, we take 1%. Very small amounts in abundant plants that allow us to have these plants continue. And maybe those are lower numbers than they really need to be. These plants grow and they get stimulated by use. Everybody needs a job. Everybody needs a job, including the plants. And it's an honor to them to give their medicine. It's an honor to them to share their food. That we're different than they are. If I'm hungry and I go lop off your finger, that has a dramatic effect on you. That's not a balanced experience. But if I'm hungry and gather leaves from an edible plant, that's what an edible plant, part of their gift. I'm able to give in different ways, but not so easily of my body. They can. When we gather, we want it to look good. We want to gather the correct amounts. We're always engaging our minds. We're never finished with that. I learn every single day. I watch where I gather. I've been gathering plants where I live for 20 years, and they thrive. I'm very careful, but it's not that difficult. It's not that difficult. It just requires remembering that their well-being comes first and thinking, using your mind. With roots, we're more careful, of course. We're thoughtful. Some plants, we avoid taking all the roots from, say, a large bush. No need. We can take smaller amounts. Some roots, like, for example, a yellow dock, which is similar in form to a carrot, we take the whole root. But it is an abundant plant, and we take a certain amount from a given area. Never all. Never even close to all.
I'm going to put a caveat here because it's really important. Don't eat anything you don't know what it is. Period. There are some truly poisonous things. However, you can also be sensible. Dandelions are not going to hurt you. You eat too much, you'll spend a day in the bathroom. That's about it, okay? Lamb's quarters, a beautiful, beautiful plant. This has been eaten for thousands of years, as dandelions have been too. Amaranth, wild amaranth, called pigweed. Oh my God. Amaranth was banned by Cortez and his men. If he found anyone with amaranth, he killed them. Why? He wanted to starve them. Amaranth is a main grain. Wild amaranth grows everywhere. It grows from coast to coast, border to border. It's down in Mexico. It's up in Canada. All you have to do to gather the grain is, when it's a dead head, shake it into a paper bag. All the little seeds drop into the bag. If there's some chaff with it, which there will be, all you have to do is, when you want to eat it, drop it in water first. All the chaff floats, get rid of it, Cook the grain. You cook it just like you cook any grain. They're little like poppy seeds, but they're delicious. They're a cereal. Chia. Chia has become a new favorite. Well, it's not new. Sorry. Salvia hispanica, another main grain crop of all of the Middle Americas. And the chia seeds are part of the whole culture with amaranth. And now, of course, we're bringing back spelt, and we're bringing back all of these other wonderful little grains, quinoa and so forth. Einkorn, which is the precursor of wheat and hasn't been meddled with. So it is digestible still. Now, the other part that I wanted to mention is the fact that this is where I get a lot of the medicinals that I use with myself, my kids, my grandkids, and they're little miracles. And they're safe, safe, safe. I mean, you're not going to say, well, beware because this could hurt your liver. Beware, this could hurt your kidneys. This could mess up your head. No, they're edible and medicinal for a reason. They're good for us.
So people can connect to plants in so many different ways, and now the internet is super powerful right now for connecting with plants. I think the most difficult part when people are starting out is the names, because you have common names and you have common names, and every country has a different common name for the same plant, and then you have scientific names, and a lot of times those scientific names, especially lately, have been changing. And so I think that might be the struggle for some people, is the names. There's great books and there's great websites for identifying things, but you kind of have to have a base. It's really good to have teachers at the beginning to kind of get you in the right direction, like what looks like what's in the same family, in the area that you are. So anybody that's local that knows plants is probably your best bet.
And I actually had to make a choice between going to TCM or traditional Chinese medicine school, or special for going back in the military and going in. I was in already prior service, going back in as into Special Forces Medic School. And I picked SF or Green Beret Medic because I felt like it was a much more basic start. I always believe in starting at the ground zero and working with, in medicine, to me that's trauma. That's working with a minimum of it's kind of the ditch medicine, working with a minimum of equipment and a minimum of supplies and still being able to do what you do. It's always appealed to me very much. So that's kind of where I was. So I already had that mindset. But then by the time I got out, and even while I was in, I was doing things like vision quests, and I was spending a lot of time testing my own survival skills out in the woods. And so being out in the woods for weeks at a time with nothing, I would take a knife and a container and an elk skin, and that was it, and I would work with that. And so, at first it was just for a few days, and then it would be for, 5 days, and then it would be for a few weeks. And so as I would go, I would learn and work with these edible plants, maybe that I'd learned, before, and test them out. And maybe I tested them a little bit in my backyard or, in the kitchen, and then I'd go out and I'd actually have to live off of them. So all of these things would make a really big impact on me, that interface with nature. And so the transition took me about 15 years to come up with, organizing into these 4 paths. I mean, it was a big transition for me to do that. And by the time I got done, it was essential enough to me that I literally tattooed what is the logo of the school up my back. I mean, it's, these 5 runes that incorporate the 5 different areas, the 4 paths, and then leadership and teamwork, and the way they're represented in the DNA strand was really, I came to the extent of realization that was why I'm here. I mean, I think everybody has to recognize your purpose on the planet. What is your calling? If you go through life and never have a calling, you are spiritually lost, as they would say in a lot of tribes, in a lot of indigenous medicine. I spent time with a shaman in Nicaragua, in the jungles of Nicaragua, and we talk about that, how Americans and a lot of the first world countries, people have these diseases of the spirit, depression and anxiety and ADHD and bulimia and dietary problems and all the things that go around that, and then suicide and drug addiction and those kinds of things are considered illnesses of the spirit in that kind of an environment. And for that reason, their idea of spirit doesn't have anything to do with religion or church. It has to do with where are you in your life in terms of what you're meant to be doing. So that higher calling, it took years, over a decade for me to finally understand it. But once I did, I realized I'd really always been there, and everything I'd done up to that point was just a building block to get me to where I'm at now.
I think that people can really increase what would be considered sustainable by looking at the plants around them and using plants that are closer by. And I do think about, like, we use fibers from all over the world, and we like to eat bananas, which don't grow here. So what could we eat that's here and enjoy? I mean, I don't think that people are going to eat things that don't taste good just because they're from the area that they live in. But when we used to do foraged feasts where we would have chefs create things from those native plant ingredients, and they were awesome. So you can take the ingredients and you can do it like the lamb's quarters is kind of like spinach. So we made spanakopita, and we made empanadas with the native spinach. So you can take those ingredients, kind of see what they're like. So other people have looked at choya buds, and choya buds kind of have a little bit of a slime to them. And so does okra. So you could say, oh, well, let's make that into like a gumbo, and you can and it can be really good. It can be really terrible too if you don't make things right, but that's true of any food, right? So maybe to look at the ingredients of something you'd like to make and see if you can substitute something that's local. And that supports not just the plants, but the economy in the area, especially if somebody's collecting, sustainably. I know there's a lot of concern, and there's been a lot. I was talking to Jamie, who lives in the east, and just the ginseng collection and kind of the destruction of that population because of the popularity. So there's a balance to it too.
Yes, there is a balance to everything we do in life. And you see, even herbal medicine, sustainable medicine, plant medicine is interconnected to every facet of sustainability, right? If we purchase local herbs or local plants, then we're supporting the local economy, we're supporting the local community. If we grow our own medicine, then we are creating this regenerative cycle for the planet, because we're not having to buy from somewhere else. And if we grow and harvest and make our own medicine, then we're not having to order it in capsules or tinctures or liquids from other parts of the country, other parts of the world, eliminating all that need for the pollution from shipping, all that need from the pollution for production and manufacturing, all that need for pollution from that whole system. I mean, one little thing like that, it's little, but it's huge. It makes a global impact. So when we look at these facets of sustainability, we learn that they're all intertwined and all interconnected. And by picking and choosing each little thing that we can do differently, we can do more sustainable, such as gathering our own medicine, growing our own medicine, and sharing our own medicine and purchasing it locally through the plant kingdom, through natural sustainable plant medicines, then we are automatically making a huge difference in the positive, regenerative, sustainable impact of the planet. And again, we're creating an opportunity for each of us as individuals and for our communities to thrive indefinitely. And that's what sustainability to me is all about. It's about getting to a place of regeneration and thriving so that we can continue a beautiful, abundant, thriving experience here on planet Earth for many, many, many years to come, and pass that down to our future generations. So again, please share this episode and please share this series with everybody you know. Let's continue making this wake and this wave of positive and powerful information and change in so many people's lives. And please join us for tomorrow night's episode, because we're going to talk about sustainable creativity and what that looks like in art, media, and music. And this is a piece that's really missing in a lot of conversations in a lot of schools, and I think it's partly responsible for a lot of the major challenges we're facing here on the planet, using too much linear in-the-box thinking. So let's go have fun in tomorrow night's episode, listen to a live performance from Sons of the Earth, and really get to dive deeply into what it means to have creative sustainability. Thank you. Have a beautiful night.